You know, I think Honkai Star Rail has quickly become one of my favorite gacha games. The setting and worlds are fun, even if you spend a little bit too much time in a few of the locations. And the turn-based combat is both stackable and auto-playable. So while it's fun, if you're grinding, you can just set it to fight the same boss 6 times and go make dinner. But really the thing that keeps drawing me back into the game are the characters. And I don't just mean in the game's combat. The characters are well written. Hell, even the player character, someone who's usually just kind of a blank slate for the player to project themselves onto, goes from being just that, a blank slate, to being a snarky, teasing treasure hoarder who can't help but open every single box they find. And of course there are some fan favorites like Firefly, Sparkle, Aventurine, and so many more. Oh, and before you ask, no, this is not a sponsored video or anything like that, but I wouldn't say no if Hoyoverse wanted to sponsor us. Now, I am no expert on the connected lore of the Honkai universe, or multiverse, I guess, so I'm just going to give a quick breakdown of what's going on in this game's world. And while I say world, it's more like worlds, because unlike Honkai Impact 3rd, which takes place on an alternate Earth, Star Rail is constantly hopping between planets and star systems on a train known as the Astral Express, which has the most adorable conductor ever. And on this train is where we are going to meet the subject for today's video, the crew of the Astral Express, otherwise known as the Nameless, consisting of Himeko, Welt, Dan-heng, March 7th, and of course the Trailblazer themselves, Stella or Kalis. I'm going to use Stella because that's who I picked when I played the game. And each member of the crew has a job, or at least a role on the train, even if it's just combat or giving out fatherly advice, like Pom Pom, who runs the train, or Himeko, who is the navigator, and so on. But as always, I'm going to be taking this crew and translating them into D&D 5e and seeing just how well they would do as a team, with Stella and Dan-heng in the front, March 7th and Himeko in the middle, and Welt in the back. Is this an actually well-balanced team, or do they need to get a few new members? Well, let's figure that out. Of course, starting with the player character themselves, the Trailblazer. As the newest member of the crew and the player character, I think it's more than fair to start with Stella, who has a pretty strange introduction, because moments after having an artifact shoved into her unconscious body, Stella only has a few moments to ask what's going on and get a little advice from Glasses Lady here before she's left to her own devices, unsupervised with a baseball bat, where she jumps right into combat to help two of her soon-to-be friends, March 7th and Dan-heng. Because of course, whatever happened that woke Stella up also attracted the Antimatter Legion, who we won't really be getting into here, just know that they don't like when things exist. And while fighting one of these called the Doomsday Beast, Stella jumps in front of an attack meant for March 7th, blocking the attack at her own risk. And this, oddly enough, gives us an idea of what Aeons are. I know I just brought that up all of a sudden, but trust me, it's important. Because this act, possibly combined with the artifact that Kafka put in Stella's chest, attracts the attention of an Aeon, who are godlike entities throughout the universe that embody certain concepts. And in this case, Stella attracted the gaze of Nanook. Now, attracting the gaze of an Aeon can either be a good or bad thing depending on which one you manage to get. And unfortunately for Stella, Nanook, the Destruction, is not one you really want to notice you. He is the leader of the Antimatter Legion, and just kind of wants everything to die. He's also really not a fan of Stella, or anyone for that fact, walking his path without his permission, and tries to kill her right then and there. And if not for Welt stepping in and both calming down the artifact and breaking the connection between Stella and Nanook, he probably would have. And speaking of that artifact, the thing that might have actually made her strong enough to catch Nanook's gaze in the first place is what's known as a Seed of Destruction, or just called a Stellaron. And Stellarons themselves are almost like a cancer to the universe. They spread from system to system, fragmenting space and making interstellar travel more difficult as they disrupt the flow of energies used by groups not only like the IPC, but also the Astral Express, which originally set down the tracks that are used for long-distance travel. So that brings the question of why is one of them locked away in your player character's chest right up at the beginning? And also, why is it seemingly fine being there, not doing anything? Unfortunately, I don't have those answers. That's not this type of video. But I'm sure you can find that somewhere on YouTube, or just play the game. And all of this is just in the tutorial, but I also bring it up because I think the Stellaron gives me a good reason to make Stella something more than human, which we will get into real quickly after we cover her background. So first off, with Stella's inability to not look for treasure, even going so far as to start searching all the trash cans in Belobog, I couldn't resist kind of leaning into the joke a little bit and calling her background the Trash Panda, with athletics and investigation so she can search for even the smallest bit of treasure. And for a few reasons, like, I don't know, tanking the giant death beam, I gave her the tough feat here. Also, raccoons are tough little guys. Now Stella, along with every other character in the game, follows a certain path, a way of life that shapes them as they shape the path back, and walking these paths grants different abilities. Like I said before, Stella walks the path of destruction thanks to a mixture of the Stellaron in her chest and damn near overpowering a Doomsday Beast less than an hour after becoming sentient. But you can actually walk more than one path at a time, as shown not only by Stella having I think 4 paths right now, but even March 7th got a second path semi-recently, so it's not just the MC that can do this. But following the path of destruction means a few things. These characters usually fall into the category of bruisers, dealing high damage while also being able to take a good amount of damage in return. In Stella's case, she just kind of bonks stuff with her bat really hard. Now before I mentioned making Stella more than human, and there are technically a few options I could go with for her here, but I think the best one that fits is actually going to be the Aasimar, giving her resistance to radiant and necrotic damage, which explains the laser thing, but it also covers one of her abilities, specifically her technique, Immortal Third Strike, which heals Stella and her party. And most of her abilities are going to be like this. She is the first character ever in the game. Her abilities are really simple. 3 of them are just smack, smack but sideways, and a big bonk, which coincidentally means her overall build is going to be really simple, starting with a good strength and con score, and okay charisma. Sure, she's kind of a fresh person, but she is pretty snarky, and it's not like she's fully socially inept. As for her class, well, I think you know where I'm going with this. Stella, with a nickname like the Galactic Baseballer, is very clearly a fighter, which covers her chunky HP bar and ability to bonk really hard. Unfortunately, the way I usually get each character's level by going over their feats and looking at things they've done isn't super useful here, but I do have a few things. Again, her fighting the Doomsday Beast less than an hour after waking up and tanking its laser. She fought Argenti to a standstill, kinda. Not to mention, she fought off this giant bug, which was a failed recreation of an Aeon. You know, one of the gods of the universe, so I think that puts her at a pretty high level. And given all this, I would actually say that Stella goes as far as 15 levels into Champion Fighter, letting her crit more often with improved and superior critical, on top of getting 2 fighting styles, great weapon fighting and defense. Along with that, she gets some feats for good measure, and to make sure she's hitting with her bat as hard as she can. Those feats being GWM and Crusher for offense, also making things easier to hit after critting them. And on the durability side of her build, the durable feat is always a must-have. I love it. They made it so much better than it used to be in the old 2014 rules. And lastly, to make sure that Stella can actually hit more than one blow at a time with those wide swings, I think taking the Martial Adept feat for sweeping attack is a good pickup. Now level 15 is pretty high already, but there are 2 more things I want to add, mostly just because. One of them is almost purely visual in-game with her bat sparking and glowing with the energy of destruction, and the other one is, well, how Stella just kind of chooses not to die. Now given when this happens she does change to the preservation path, but I'm not building that version of her here. However, if you're on my Patreon you can get both the destruction and preservation paths for the Trailblazer. But back to the build, I think a few levels in Zealot Barbarian not only fits with how hard and tanky she is, but also works great for her inability to die even when stabbed clean through the heart. And yes, Stella's build is super simple, but simple doesn't mean bad. She gets 3 to 6 attacks at 1d10 plus 7 each, with 1d6 radiant damage on one of those attacks, has advantage on all of them, and crits on an 18 to 20 on top of her over 200 HP. So yeah, Stella is a beast, but as long as you don't threaten anyone she cares about, you shouldn't have to worry about her hitting a home run with your head. She's probably too busy looking for treasure in the garbage anyway. Okay, so simplicity aside, Stella's build is one I would actually play. I love tanking huge hits and smacking back, but the next one should be at least a little bit more complicated. The setting for Honkai Star Rail is massive. One quest can have you searching for ghosts on a space station, while the next could plop you down in the middle of a civil war on a frozen industrial planet. And if you ever plan on running a Star Rail style game, or really any game that had you traveling between locations and places with huge differences in terrain and biome, you might have some trouble finding good quality maps. Which is where our first ever sponsor comes in. I'm sure you've heard of them by now. This is Cheipeku. They make absolutely amazing maps for D&D, Pathfinder, or really any TTRPG. You can get these on their website, link in the description, or by subscribing to their Patreon. And these maps are gorgeous, but not just that, they come with a bunch of different variations that change how they feel. You can go from day to night, at a campsite, set it on fire, flood it, change the water to blood, and so many different things depending on which map you pick. Right now I'm getting a ton of use out of their desert maps since my party is currently trapped on a desert planet. And if you're looking for anything specific, they tag all of their maps, so they are super easy to find either on their website or Patreon. And trust me, it is a lot easier than scrounging through Google Images or r/battle maps for anything of quality. You want a desert map? Bam, there you go. Do you need some caves because your party took cover from a sandstorm and decided to go digging? That's not a problem, there are just so many cave maps. The people at Chipeku have been building this catalog of maps for years, with over like 6,000 of them already, and they release up to 5 map packs every month, which is just a ton of stuff to get. So if you're looking for some really high quality maps, not to mention the tokens via their token maker, go check them out through our link in the description below. I'm sure you will find something to your liking. Also, if you want to support the channel and get these character sheets, including Preservation Trailblazer and Hunt March 7th, you can get those on my Patreon for just $1. Of course, we still have our huge 35% discount code with Homie and the Dude still up. That code is GMG to get some amazing stuff included in the Wandering Tavern. This code will continue to work for the foreseeable future, so if you want to save some money and support some people making really cool stuff, go use our code. Okay, so I'm a little late, like around a month or so, but next up is going to be the Astro Express's very own Shutterbug, March 7th. You know, if I had a nickel for every amnesiac on this train, I'd have 2 nickels.
Which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right?
Funnily enough, March probably knows even less about herself than Stella does. At least she remembers Kafka's name. But sadly for March, she just kind of woke up on the Express one day after the crew found her floating through space in an ice cube and decided to melt her out of it. But from then on, she takes a camera with her everywhere she goes, just in case she ever forgets things ever again. She'll have plenty of pictures to hopefully jog her memory with. But despite her lack of memories, March is a very optimistic person, always collecting new memories and generally being pretty cheerful, even if Stella is continuously teasing her.
Think before opening your mouth.
She's always excited to go on new adventures, meet new people, and kick some butt. Now, while I could take the easy route and make her background more about her lack of memory, I wanted to have this more reflect her current state. So March is going to be a human, since I can't think of anything else she might be, with the Magic Initiate feat for some ice magic. And March is a Shutterbug, someone who is always glued to their camera, which at least for me, who's had plenty of DMs use history checks for memory and stuff, means she can get the history skill for just taking a bunch of pictures all the time. And lastly, before we talk about her abilities in-game, March's stats. She is very charismatic, being extremely outgoing and generally easy to get along with, and everything else is, well, it's fine. She does know how to use a sword, even in her normal non-hunt form, and she is tankier than you would expect, so decent con and dex. But unlike her friend Stella, March does actually have more up her sleeve than just caving in skulls. From a lore perspective, she can create special 6-phase ice, which is kind of a real thing. It's ice created under extreme pressure instead of just low temperatures. She uses this ability to create ice to make arrows, thin barriers over herself or allies, or mini sculptures of pom-pom, which she then throws at people to freeze them. I'm pretty sure somewhere it says she can make other things like swords and so on, but I'm just going to focus on the arrows, shields, and pom-poms for now. In-game, she can obviously attack, use her skill to put a shield on her allies, which can also remove status conditions, or freeze entire enemy lineups with a hail of pom-pom ice sculptures. Now, there are a few ways you could do this. Since March isn't quite the same as most ice users like Gray or Todoroki, she is still an archer, and more of a support character overall. Also, if March doesn't go support, the team is going to be really lopsided. And with March going down more of a support route, I think the stats that I gave her work really well for what I have in mind. She'll be relying on her high charisma to do a lot of support things, like giving temp HP, removing conditions, and even healing a little bit. But I do want to cover the ice part of her powers first, since it's just as important, and while she won't be sticking to her first class, I think using the Sorcerer as a base for these powers is the right start. With basic cantrips like Ray of Frost being good for her ice arrows, along with a few higher level spells that she can later turn into ice spells via the Transmute spell Metamagic. She can also use spells like False Life, Aid, and Protection from Energy for her skill to shield herself and her allies. And Sorcerer is also where March is going to get her ult, which was surprisingly easy all things considered. It's a large wave of ice in the shape of pom-pom sculptures, yes, but still ice that deals some damage and can freeze enemies hit by it. That's just Cone of Cold. Sure, Cone of Cold only freezes when it kills them, but Hold Person or Hold Monster can cover that part if you really need it to. And honestly, that is the majority of March's abilities, but there are still a few more things I want, plus level 9 just doesn't seem high enough. So I do have one other class in mind, but before we get to that, there's one other thing I really need to mention about one of March's skills. Now this next part was a little bit harder to work out. When March puts her shield on an ally, they not only get some extra health to work with and get to cleanse any debuffs on them, but if someone attacks the shielded ally, March gets to make a follow-up attack against them, firing her bow at the attacker. And this took a bit of work to get going, but with the combo of a few feats, those being Warcaster for being able to make opportunity attacks with spells, and the Sentinel feat, letting March make an opportunity attack when a nearby ally is attacked. So now she can fire a Ray of Frost, or even better, an upcasted Ice Knife at the attacker. It is kinda up to you if you really only want to do this on someone that you've put a shield on, but I'm not gonna stop you. And again, that's kind of everything March gets, but I do think we can add a little bit more to all of it. Plus, I'm pretty sure the Hold Monster spell came from her second class, which, by the way, this script is being written like 2-ish weeks after I made the builds, so remembering which lists got which spells is not something that got logged. Anyways, after being a sorcerer for 9 levels, I think the next best class for March and her focus on support and keeping her team alive is another class that uses her high charisma, which of course is going to be the Bard. Now honestly, there are only a few things we're really here for, one of them being the Hold Monster spell, yes, but also another feat in the form of Spell Sniper for longer range spells and a +1 to charisma, on top of the new Counter Charm, which is actually really useful being a reaction to failing a saving throw. But also for a quick shield, March gets Mantle of Inspiration from being a College of Glamour Bard. This does come with some more charming abilities than I think she really has, but come on, who wouldn't be charmed by March? She manages to get this raccoon to behave most of the time at the very least.
Oh, good plan. Treat the robots like guard dogs. How is that going to improve our chances?
And right before we finish, March gets one more feat, which she is going to use for an ASI with a +1 bump to Charisma and Con, leaving her with an 18 Charisma and 14 Constitution. And yeah, March might not be the strongest person on the crew. She's not taking spears to the chest or calling down massive space lasers. But that's not her job. Her job is to make sure that her team comes out with a few less bumps and bruises, while also getting some nice pictures along the way.
Have an ice day!
And now we are moving on to our third member of the Astro Express, who actually has a bit more backstory than the two amnesiacs, the ever-stoic Dan Heng, who spends most of his time meditating, going through the archives in the Express, or just acting as the train's guard. But unlike his friends March and Stella, who just kind of joined the Express by default after waking up, Dan Heng actually joined to escape his old life, which he spent under a different name, one that carried more strength, but also a great deal of responsibility, Dan Feng. But we're not here to build him. We will touch on it a little bit, maybe, but I promise it isn't just me being lazy, there is a reason. Well, it is also me being lazy, but shush you. But the main reason is that outside of very specific circumstances, Dan Heng actually doesn't have access to his old abilities for reasons related to what he is. Because Dan Feng, and by extension Dan Heng, aren't human despite his pretty plain looks. Taking a look at his past self, you can see some, well, draconic influences. So let's take a look at that first. Dan Heng, or as he was known before in Babi de Lune, is what's known as a... Okay, this is gonna take me a few tries, probably. A Vidyadhara. Vidyadhara? Vidyadhara. However you pronounce it, they are a long-lived species of the Xianzhao? Look, Chinese names aren't great for me. Anyway, they have a lot of dragon-like features, but the most interesting thing about them to me is that when it is time for them to pass, they don't simply die. Instead, they kind of reincarnate into a new version of themselves via turning into an egg and rehatching. They do share some memories and generally look similar to their previous selves, but they are not always the same person as they were before. Now this had me stumped for a bit. I wanted to do something dragon-like for Dan Heng, but nothing really fit, plus the Dragonborn race doesn't live as long as I need to for this. There also isn't really any lineage that can be reborn like this. Sure, there's the actual reborn one that could maybe work, but in the end, I decided to make Dan Heng very simply an exiled high elf, giving him the alert feat, the insight skill, and the ability to trance instead of sleeping. And given how both versions of him aren't super muscly, and Dan Heng spends 80% of his time sorting through and reading the Express's archives, a stat spread like this seems more than fitting, with a focus on dex and wisdom. When it comes to combat though, Dan Heng is pretty straightforward, which is kind of expected from one of the characters they just kind of throw into your party right away. He uses a spear and follows the path of the hunt, meaning he does high single target damage, and he has a few wind powers. But those are mostly just him doing wind damage, and since there is no wind damage in D&D, we're mostly going to ignore that, but only mostly. I do have something for it. Looking at Dan Heng's abilities, he just kind of stabs things. His basic attack, a stab. Skill, a faster stab. His ult, just a really big stab with some flashy effects. Given each of these abilities does have something different about them, like his skill being able to reduce speed and his ult doing extra damage to targets that are already slowed. He also has both his talent and technique, which help him get through wind resistance and can up his damage for a few turns after combat starts. And I think what I managed to come up with does cover everything Dan Heng needs for his full build, barring any of his weird dragon powers from being in Biber de Lune. And that is going to start off with what I think is the most fitting class for Dan Heng, the Kensei Monk. And sure, I could have gone fighter, but given that his training comes from the Jianzhao and just how much time he spends meditating, I think the monk just fits a lot better. Plus, being a Kensei monk will let him use a spear as a monk weapon thanks to Path of the Kensei. On top of that, he can ignore resistances with the level 6 feature one with the blade, checking off part of his skill, and we can get some extra damage for his ult with Sharpen the Blade, which does mean Dan Heng is going to be like level 11? Let's just say level 12 because I want a feat to go along with all the good monk stuff he gets, like unarmored defense, deflect attacks, and evasion to cover his very low constitution, along with heightened focus for even more attacks. And since I mentioned feats, he's going to grab just 1 here and 2 ASIs, that feat being Piercer, giving Dan Heng some more consistent damage and increasing the damage he deals on a crit. The other 2 are going to be a +2 bump to his dex and wisdom, upping pretty much everything. Now there are a few things missing here, well, mostly just one thing, his wind powers, and while you could just flavor that around his spear, I wanted something to at least suggest he does have some form of wind element to him. So to get that, Dan Heng is going to take his second class as a Ranger. And while he is going to take a few levels in the Hunter subclass for Hunter's Prey and Colossus Slayer to further push him down the path of the hunt with some high single target damage, what I really want here is a single spell. A first level Ranger spell from Xanathar's Guide to Everything known as Zephyr Strike. It lasts for up to 1 minute, increases his speed by 30 feet for that time, and once per casting he not only gets advantage, but also an extra 1d8 damage to one attack. It does suck that it's only 1 time per casting, but still, it's wind magic and it fits really well for his ult. In the end, I ended up giving Dan Heng 6 levels in Ranger, meaning he also gets Roving and a few more spells. I went with Misty Step, Gust of Wind, and just so he can actually get some sleep in his room, being right next to Marches, the Silence spell. And with one last feat at level 4 for Polearm Master, Dan Heng ends at level 18 with maxed out Dex and nearly maxed out Wisdom, so his AC is not bad, but maybe get a few magical items to make sure, or else he's probably going to end up getting stabbed again. Okay, so just 2 more, and these 2 characters are ones we've seen a bit less of, so they might be a little bit shorter. Especially since for one of them we have almost no backstory, and the other one we have, well, an entire game's worth. Let's start with the former first though, that being Himeko, the train's navigator and resident coffee enthusiast. Now we know very little about Himeko, other than when she first encountered the Astral Express, she was on her home planet going to college for interstellar travel, and had somehow ended up lost only to stumble upon the broken down Express. She managed to make some makeshift repairs, just enough to get her home where she would continue her studies, and eventually return to fully repair the Express and start her journey through the cosmos, picking up other nameless like Welt, Dan Heng, March 7th, and most recently the Trailblazer herself, Stella. No, I'm not counting the Birdman, Sunday can get hit by a train. Again. And that's about it. From what I can tell, she is a human and is very intelligent. So with all that in mind, here's what I've got for her. Again, a human with magic initiate for mending, figured that could at least get her home on the Express. And with her college and traveling across the universe, I made her background the Interstellar Explorer with the Crafter feat. Her stat spread is also very easy. Himeko is smart, knows how to communicate, and just seems competent in about everything. But sadly, using the standard point array means she's going to have to be bad at something, so strength. But moving on from there, how does Himeko fight? Because just looking at her, she really doesn't seem equipped for it. She's just got that suitcase, which, okay, she's pulling a ruby, it's also a gun. And not only is it a gun, it is also a drone with a spinning saw blade. Yep, I think I can work with this. Now, outside of the weapon Himeko carries on her person, there is one more thing I can't really not bring up when it comes to Himeko's fighting style. The fact that at all times, Himeko has an orbital laser overhead ready to turn anything in the nearby area to dust. And you know what? I think I have something for this. We'll just have to get to it. And to start on that, we are going to have to cover her fire stuff, because that's what Himeko's element is. That's all of her damage is fire damage, which thankfully for her, D&D loves fire damage, so that's not really a challenge. But I think it's important to mention that as far as I'm aware, Himeko made all of her gear, her suitcase, drone thing, her space laser, and of course the repairs in the Express itself. And the best class for someone with that kind of technical know-how is going to be the Artificer, which just happens to get pretty much everything Himeko needs for her build. Starting off with her suitcase, which thankfully comes really easily with the Artillerist subclass's Eldritch Cannon feature, which comes with a flamethrower option that deals 2d8 fire damage, but it won't be like that for too long since her first feat is Elemental Adept for fire, which, okay, it doesn't affect the actual damage, but it does make it more consistent and bumps up her intelligence. After this, Himeko does technically need an Arcane Focus, but with Arcane Firearm she can turn pretty much anything she wants into one, given that your DM allows it, and I would 100% allow her to use this on her Flamethrower to turn that into her focus, letting her fire even more spells out of it, and getting a bonus d8 to the damage of all those spells, but sadly not the cannon just yet. But the first actual increase to her Flamethrower's damage does come at level 9, upping it to 3d8 with Explosive Cannon, which yes, does allow her to detonate her weapon if she really needs to for some extra damage, but that's kind of a last resort thing or a surprise attack, and I have a feeling I'll be using this very soon for a different video. But moving on from that, Artificers are in fact half-casters, meaning that not only does Himeko get a gun, but she also has a bunch of spells and infusions, like Enhance Arcane Focus for her gun, a ring that gives her a spell slot back, a Brooch of Shielding, and Bracers of Defense to up her AC, and so on. I even managed to get her Pom-Pom by using the Homunculus Servant Infusion, just so Marge can dress Pom-Pom up in a bunch of different outfits. And that just leaves Himeko's spells, of which I have added a single one that is not on the normal list, but that's nothing new for me at this point. And obviously most of them are going to be fire spells, Firebolt, Green Flame Blade, Burning Hands, and so on, but the big ones of course are going to be Fireball, a way to nuke her enemies from orbit, or the slightly more fitting spell, at least for me, Flame Strike, summoning a huge pillar of radiant fire on the targets, dealing a total of 10d6 fire and or radiant damage. Normally this is restricted to the Cleric spell list, so moving on, Flame Strike though is a level 5 spell, and for Artificers that means she is going to be at least level 17, but I'm going to make Himeko a full level 19, just so she can grab the boon of Spell Recall. But also for some very important Artificer things, like being able to store spells in items, attune to more magical items at once, and get a few more feats to bump up her Charisma to 16. Himeko not only has some very good connections, but knows how to negotiate very well, so a decent Charisma is kinda needed there. But with all of this, I think Himeko is more than ready to travel the universe, and whether she's just making coffee, blasting a robot from space, or helping to decide the fate of an entire planet, she's got everything well figured out.
Humanity never conceals its desire to control the heavens. I'm no exception. Trailblazing means that every step we take is a step closer to the stars. That is my answer.
And with that, we have only one nameless left. And in a way, I saved the easiest character for last, but also the most complicated in other ways. So let's hurry up before my voice dies. So Welt is a character with a long history, and not because his Star Rail wiki is full of more stuff than the others. No, we know so much about Welt because he's not from this game. Welt is originally from Honkai Impact 3rd, a completely different Hoyoverse game set on Earth in, I think, the early 2000s or somewhere around there. During this time, Welt would lose people he cared for, become a Hersher of Reason, which unfortunately for me is something we won't be covering. I say unfortunately because I went and watched a bunch of stuff for Welt's past for research, and spent at least a good few hours on seeing how I could implement his powers from HI3 into this version of him. Maybe seeing what lineage would fit best for a Hersher, and yeah, no. By the time Welt travels to the Star Rail universe, or I guess this branch of the imaginary tree, he not only died several times and remade his body, but fully gave away his Hersher powers and put his soul/consciousness into a human clone. So he's just a human again, without any of his powers, and the only thing he kept was his cane, which has some interesting powers of its own. So yeah, Welt is once again a human with the Magic Initiate feat for Mage Hand and Mage Armor. And seeing as how he is from an entirely different universe, I gave him the otherworldly Traveler background, with the Alert feat as well as History and Insight skills. Welt is also extremely smart, but can be very blunt, and tends to let others do the talking in more sensitive areas. So I think his stats would look something like this. Again, high intelligence and wisdom, but he dumps charisma. I also really didn't want to dump Con for, well, what I'm sure is obvious reasons. But before we get to that exact reason, we should look at how Welt handles himself in a fight, since he no longer has his Hersher powers anymore. What he does have though is his cane, which I'm pretty sure is a relic from HI3 made from the Star of Eden, which was in fact not a cane, but a cannon that could manipulate gravity. Using this, he controls local gravity around his enemies, lifting them into the air, holding them down, or just crushing them. He can create an area around himself that slows enemies down, and if he needs to, he can even create short-lived synthetic black holes which he then destroys, causing them to explode. So yeah, Welt's entire thing now, after having all sorts of powers as a Hersher, comes down to gravity. And thankfully that is really easy for the base class for Welt to do, that being the Wizard and the School of Graviturgy, with features like Adjust Density, letting him have or double the weight of creatures, speeding them up or slowing them down. Gravity Will lets him move targets around the battlefield to group his enemies together, or even move an ally out of harm's way when it's not their turn. Hell, he can even just cause attacks to hit harder or take extra falling damage by increasing the gravity around them. But of course, the big thing outside of the Graviturgy spells is the Event Horizon feature, which for Welt is almost a one-to-one with his technique, Gravitational Imprisonment, where any hostile creature around him have to make a saving throw, and if they fail, they not only take damage for being crushed by extra gravity, but their movement speed is dropped to 0. Even if they pass the saving throw, they still take damage, and every step they take costs an extra 2 feet, so things will only be able to move like 10 feet on a pass if they have a base movement speed of 30. And that, combined with spells like Darkstar, which might as well be his ult, slowing nearby enemies and dealing 8d10 force damage every turn in the radius, and Ravenous Void, which does deal less damage than Darkstar, but if you fail to save on it, you are restrained inside of the black hole until you use your action to pass a strength save. And every turn you're in there, you are taking 5d10 force damage at the start of your turn. Oh, and of course, being in the black hole means if you are dropped to 0 HP inside of it, you are disintegrated. Or more specifically, annihilated, which I guess is worse. Now there are obviously smaller gravity spells he can use if he doesn't want to cause a big scene by summoning a hungry black hole in the middle of a space station. Spells like Magnify Gravity that covers a 10-foot radius with 2d10 force damage. He can lock objects in place with a movable object, or crush his enemies in an instant with Gravity Sinkhole. There are actually quite a few good options for spells that deal force damage, which is one of the least resisted damage types in the game. Which honestly tracks. How are you going to resist your body being crushed by its own weight? And of course, he has plenty of other spells that either don't do damage or do force damage, like Shield, Magic Missile, Pulse Wave, which is a great one, Hold Monster, Disintegrate, Forced Cage. The list is pretty big. He is a wizard after all, so he's got a ton of spells. So yeah, being the character I spent the longest time researching, but was by far the easiest to build. With only a few feats and ASIs to max out his intelligence, like Warcaster, Gift of the Gem Dragon for a little more gravity stuff, and another feat called Agent of Order, something I haven't used before, which technically requires the Scion of the Outer Planes background, but that is pretty close to what I made him anyway. Also, it lets him lock down enemies even more when he damages them, and deal an extra 1d8 force damage when he does. So unless you want to be slowly compressed until you are just a single strand of atoms moving to the center of a black hole, I think you should stay well and clear of Welt, or at least just don't piss him off.
Mr. Yang, is she...
They're okay now. Let's talk somewhere else.
Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed that one. This one is actually mostly edited by me. I did send it to Goblin for some other stuff at the end, like sound effects and other cool stuff that I don't know how to do. But for the most part, just like old times, it is me editing. Mostly so we can just get ahead a bit more. We were super busy in March with some traveling stuff, so we kind of fell behind. Plus, I don't want to get rusty on editing. And don't worry, Goblin is still our editor. He's going to be editing most of our videos. I just wanted to do this one myself, with a little help. Anyways, as always, I want to thank my testers for helping out a ton with these builds, so thank you guys. And my patrons. You guys are awesome, and I wouldn't be able to afford doing this if it wasn't for you, so I still can't quite thank you enough. Remember, we do have that new $20 tier where you can effectively commission me to make a team, so if you really want to see a team on this video, go there. Just make sure you check the polls so you aren't paying for something that's already in the process of being made. That's gonna do it for today though. I will see you all next time, and as always, have a wonderful day.